So thank you. I know it is the last session of the day, and we really appreciate everyone coming to hear from some practitioners, hear from what it's like on the ground to start and to be like, what does it mean to be in a school that really understands competency-based education and think about things differently. So if you don't know me and us, I will really quickly introduce what's going on here. We have 4 individuals, all of whom who've had experience both in traditional settings and who have then transitioned into competency-based education. And I want to introduce myself, because the one person who doesn't have the experience that they have is me. I'm Matthew Pilarski. I work for Springpoint. Springpoint had a small part in starting each of their high schools. In short order, what we do at Springpoint is we build high schools. Now, I said that when I got the role that I have at Springpoint, and my dad got really excited. He's like, oh, are you an architect now? I was like, well, no, not really at all, but kind of. What we do is we help school districts, we help CMOs, we help partners build new high schools based on some new design principles. Now, these design principles were strangely commissioned by Carnegie, the guy who gave us the Carnegie unit, which basically designed how all high schools operate everywhere. And Carnegie, his long predecessors and people that followed him said, wait a second, these aren't working anymore. And they commissioned a big study, and they came up with some OBD principles. And these OBD principles basically said the way that we've been the way that we've been doing high school isn't working at all. And when we came up with these principles, they said, you know what, we need an organization that's going to help districts and CMOs transition into starting these new small high schools. And so that's a little bit about what Springpoint does. We started in 2013. We work with 6 different cities. We work with Denver and Philadelphia and Providence and Cleveland and Prince George's County and New York City and what else am I forgetting? In Denver. And we work with all these places, and we just help them figure out, how do I start a brand new small school in an organization that, for the most part, has very traditional surroundings and traditional settings. And so we have 4 teachers who are going to help us talk this through, what it means to do that. And the other thing that we're going to try to do is something that I've actually never done before, which is this chain reaction panel. So instead of having me moderate and just kind of ask one question and have it pass it around depending on who wants to talk, what we've done is we've talked a bunch to each other prior to now, thinking about, well, what do you want to talk about when you talk about being a competency-based educator? And also, what do you want to ask? And so what we have here is this chain reaction where I'm going to start, and I'm going to hand it to the person I'm going to talk to. They're going to talk a little bit about what they think is the best way to handle the question, and then they're going to transition to something else that they want to talk about. And we've set this up to, in a way, showcase a different kind of way to do a panel, because I've never done this, so maybe other people are really familiar with it, but we want to do this as well, so this is something new. So we kind of want to test that out as well. Also, on your chairs, you will see that you have some note cards, which we've put there. And at the middle of the session, we're going to stop. We're going to do 2 chain reactions, which means I'm going to ask Tim a question, and then he's going to ask someone else, and we're going to go around. We're going to do that twice, but then we're going to start asking. I know, it's not Tim. I know, Troy. You're not Tim today. And then we're going to ask for some audience participation. So we are asking that all of you, it is the last session of the day. You are about ready to do whatever it is going to happen at 5:15, which will hopefully be very fun. But please come up with a question for these 4 educators. And we love to have that. And I think Angela, who's going to raise her hand over there, is going to be kind of circulating once in a while. So she'll grab some questions from you so that we can see what else in the room people want to talk about. But before we do all that, and we've introduced Springpoint, so let's introduce who we have here. So if we could start down here, introduce yourself to the room.
Hi guys, Matthew Dodge. I'm assistant principal. I need a mic. You need a mic? Sorry. No teacher voice.
I think it's just on.
It's on. Okay. Sorry. Matthew Dodge. I am now assistant principal for Denver School of Innovation and Sustainable Design, first competency-based high school in Denver Public Schools. I'm here to share our experience.
I'm Liz Dowdell. I am a physics and math teacher at Urban Assembly Maker Academy in New York City. We founded about 3 years ago. I've been doing competency or mastery-based work for a little while. I started at a previous school that was very traditional, and with the support of actually some of the people in this room, started piloting doing some of that work in my classroom and in a few other classrooms, and then had the opportunity about 3 years ago to help lead some of that work at UA Maker to make sure that our school was founded with a mastery-based model.
Hello, my name is Tim Hurt, and I'm going to do something a little differently. I'm going to tell you why I started teaching. I come from a traditional classroom setting, but I'll tell you why. I would love to say that teaching was my first choice for a career, and I had the noblest intentions for teaching, but picture it, 1980, in D.C., a young kid sits in front of the TV, and he's watching these trashy talk shows like Jerry Springer and Sally Jesse Raphael and Morton Downey Jr., and I'm like, hey, my last name's Hurt. Let me get a talk show, and it's going to be called The Truth Hurts, and it's going to be amazing. And so I had these dreams, and I had these goals, and this is around 7th grade, and then the wheels fell off. I said I'm from D.C., so this was the 80s, crack hit, and it devastated my neighborhood just as it did so many other inner cities across the country. I found myself making bad choices and bad decisions, and most of this was spurred on by my brother. And who doesn't want to be like their big brother? So I wanted to do everything he did. So he was doing the wrong things. I did the wrong things. School suffered. I started skipping. I started missing school. And when I was in school, I was a distraction. I would do just enough to get past to the next grade. And then I found myself graduation day on a Friday. That Monday came and I had absolutely nothing to do. Absolutely no college choices, no other career choices. My dad said, you're going to do something, go in the military. Years fly by, and then I reflect on, why did I make these decisions? And it came back to, I didn't have a voice in my ear. I didn't have a teacher in my ear telling me, Tim, you can be more than what you're doing. You're smart. Make better choices, make better decisions. So I decided to teach because I wanted to be that voice for someone right now who really needs it.
How you doing? My name is also Tim. Just kidding. I'm Troy Grant, and I teach in Prince George's County, Maryland, which is about 30 minutes south of Baltimore. I taught in Baltimore for several years, and then I transferred to Prince George's County. I'm teaching English language learners now. However, I've been teaching predominantly African American students most of my life, and most of my teaching life. And at my last school, at High Point High School, we just started having a larger influx of Hispanic students and Spanish-speaking students. And I remember feeling like a failure. I remember talking to the ESOL teachers saying, what can we do? This kid just sits here, I don't know. And I never got the help that I needed. So when the international schools was opening up, one of their schools was opening, I said, wow, I might as well take this challenge because this will be the challenge that I need. I can actually learn how to teach students. So that's why I'm here.
So we really quickly want to know who we have in our audience because we hopefully can get some questions we can think about, who we're start tailoring what we're saying towards who we have here. So out of curiosity, do we have any teachers in the room? Wonderful, great. Any school administrators? Good mix. District or state administrators? Great. Any nonprofit? Couple nonprofit. Any ed tech? Great. Anyone else who's just wandering in through San Antonio and wanted to come to us? Yes, one man in the back. Thank you. All right, great. So we'll get started, and I'm going to have the first question for Matt. I didn't have the experience of working in a competency-based high school. I worked in a high school in the South Bronx. I taught for 8 years and was an administrator there, and started to think a lot about these processes. And as I joined Springpoint, I learned a lot about what the new design principles are around like mastery and what does it mean to be competency-based. I've learned a lot, but one of the things that I don't know is just what does it mean to be a practitioner, and also what does it mean to transition. So my first question for you is, what are some instructional shifts that you made to shape your practice in coming from a traditional school into a competency-based one?
Yeah, so starting my career as a math teacher here in San Antonio, Texas, where I actually graduated from up the road, and so I had the opportunity to come right into teaching how I learned in a very changing school due to the hurricanes that hit the Bay Area and transformed the school from when the short years that I was out of it. And so I think as I transitioned to Denver and having the opportunity I taught here for 4 years, moving to teaching math at 9th grade, And then coming here, or to Denver, and this opportunity came up for me to start exploring and pushing myself. I am not meeting the needs of my students. And I was teaching in a similar demographic than I was here in Denver, northeast of Denver, and I was not reaching my kids. I was failing as a teacher, and my growth was very stagnant. And so, I had the opportunity to work with some partners to kind of spark a different approach, and thinking about how can I adjust and learn and continue learning and in a way that's going to meet the needs of all my kids. And so it really came down to some micro shifts that I thought about or that I got to experience. And the first thing was really getting out there and seeing what's being done. And so I had the opportunity to go and visit 3 math classes and that were using approaches within blended. They were all 3 different approaches to blended learning, but they were starting to think about, or had me start thinking about the big picture. And so that big picture was what do I want? The question that came up was, what do I want my kids to leave my classroom knowing, and how am I going to have them demonstrate that? I mean, that's a pretty loaded question as a teacher, and thinking about, man, I got to figure this out for 30 different kids 6 times a day. And so I really came down to 3 things, 3 micro shifts that helped me. First one was thinking about what is mastery? What do I want my kids to come through, leaving the classroom with specifically? What did it look like? And how am I going to provide students the choice and voice in not only in how they were going to learn, but how they were going to demonstrate that they had that mastery? And so that was the first thing for me to, big picture-wise and planning-wise as teachers, like what do I value as a math teacher and what skills I want them to leave with? The second thing was like model. And what I mean by that is just model failure and learning. I think the most powerful thing that for me when I was making that transition or thinking about a competency-based approach was how am I modeling learning and failing forward for my kids? And with that, like how am I being transparent with my students about my learning and their learning, where they were, and mostly how am I taking into account their input? Our students' input was opening, the input that I was receiving was opening new opportunities that I didn't think about for my kids. So how am I including their voice in the process itself? And don't be afraid to fail and show that with them. And then finally, mug up. That was a new word that I just discovered today. And mug up just really is study, research, and revise, and really thinking about what that means in your context, and plan to continue learning. Find a community to learn and continue those practices. And that learning community is going to be what helps you continue to evolve and make those iterations quicker. And so it'll kind of lead me to my question. And part of this is, obviously I didn't speak to it at all, but everybody's always wondering, well, how'd you do it? And again, they always want to talk about what challenges were uncovered by doing that. So my question is going to be to Troy, and what is the biggest challenge in going from a traditional model to a competency-based model?
Thanks a lot, Matt. So I think one of the things you said when you were talking, you said a micro shift, right? And I think about, I wouldn't say micro, and I wouldn't say macro either, right? So, but a shift, definitely a paradigm shift that I think teachers first, right? Teachers firstly have to buy into the program because we hear about it before our students do, right? So we're hired first. And I think that for us, we have to buy into it at the core level. That's a big shift that has to happen. And what I mean by that is simply understanding that this is different and it's not inferior to the traditional system. So, for instance, I've heard staff members say stuff like, well, competencies and social emotional, it's just all subjective, so I don't really know what I'm doing. And it's like, well, the truth is traditional grading is subjective as well. It is. And if we really look at it, we don't want to admit that, right? We want to act as if it's this objective thing where the grades are just automatically, mysteriously appearing based on some meritocracy. But it's not. We have a lot to do with that. So it just takes time to buy into the idea. Also, I've heard some of my colleagues say stuff like mocking, right, the process. Like, so with competency-based education, we have this mantra that did you get, like, let's say they have to achieve maybe 6 out of 18 competencies in order to get credit, let's say, for a class. And if they did not achieve a competency in a particular class, there's a column that says, did you achieve it or not, right? And the answer is not yet. It's not no, it's not yet. Because the idea is that you will have time to be able to reach mastery. But I've heard some of my colleagues like joke about that, right? And it's like, well, not yet. But it's like, the idea is like, don't mock the system, right? Really buy into it. So that mockery tells me that there's not a true core buy-in. And then finally, I've heard colleagues say stuff like, well, this is the way we grade here, but in the real world, right? As if that world of traditional teaching is more real than what we're doing here. So I would say that whole idea is really about buy-in. It's really about making sure that the teachers first, right, understand what this thing is and really kind of internalize, right, how awesome and powerful it is before we introduce it to the students. Yeah, but thanks for your question. I have a question about implementation, right? This is about the CBE thing, and this goes to you, the original Tim.
The real Tim.
Okay,
the real Tim.
I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop with the Tim thing, just to let you know. I'm gonna let you off the hook. So, so Tim, what? Please say what leadership, because I just said what the teachers had to do, right? So, what do leaders have to do in terms of helping CBE transition effectively in a classroom?
Okay, thank you, Troy. With the leadership in my school, what they did in order to give us the best chance of success is that they protected us from the people that pushed back, the community and the parents, because we didn't understand off the jump what competency-based or mastery-based was. So the parents definitely didn't. They're all products of traditional schools. And what traditional grades do for the parents is they provide a snapshot at any given time of how their kids are doing. So that's, oh, little Johnny's getting the A, he's doing amazing. But then you come back and say little Johnny's not meeting expectations or he's approaching. What does that mean? What grade is that? Is that a C? Is that a B? No, he hasn't yet mastered, so he's approaching. So what our leadership did in our school, meaning my principal, he really was the PR guy for competency-based education. He was the one on the front lines extolling the virtues of mastery-based, and while we, the teachers, tried to figure it out. Because we're moving from a traditional setting into a mastery-based setting, so we're like jack of two trades, master of none. So our level of security with this is not very high at this point, so we're not ready to explain to the parents and to the community how their kids will be assessed and if their kids are actually learning. So I think great leadership actually provides insulation from sources that would kind of dampen the process for everyone. All right, so we talked about grading. I just spoke about grading and what the parents think about CBE grading and how we do it and what it looks like. So this question is for you, Liz. How do you communicate about CBE grading to students and families so that they understand expectations and assessment practices?
So yeah, as Tim mentioned, a lot of our parents and our students have experienced very different grading systems, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of changes that they have to accept if we're going to do a mastery-based model. And if it's not clear and transparent to the students, the value of the system gets degraded, because the whole point of mastery is so that students can use it to improve their learning. So some of the work that we've done is trying to actually take time, we often do it during our advisory, to actually teach lessons directly about, like, what is this system? Why are we doing it? Not the same type of message, not the same type of information you do for teachers, but kind of building on that teacher buy-in. You also need to get your students bought into what it is and why you're doing it. The other key thing with the students was then listening, especially at a new school. We didn't have our systems 100% developed to begin with, and listening to them and, like, what was confusing to them, how they thought they could use that feedback, and really listening to what their feedback was about our system and then making those changes. In terms of communicating to parents, we have an extremely diverse population. We're in Lower Manhattan of New York City. We have parents that speak upwards of 20 to 30 different languages at home. So a lot of times the students are the most powerful communication mechanism. We definitely work with translators, and we run webinars with our parents, and we do workshops and things like that as well. But having student-led conferences where, like, one of my advisees, his father only speaks Mandarin. I don't speak any. And he's been able to lead those conferences and really be able to communicate to his father what is the system and what it means about his grades. And when parents can hear that their children are benefiting from it firsthand, that the students can talk about, this is how it's helped me, I was here, and this is how I'm doing better, that's the most powerful mechanism of communication, because if parents know that their children are doing well and understand how to do better, they'll be on your side.
Great, thank you. So that was our first chain reaction, and I want to, again, iterate. If you have a question, please write it down. We're going to do one more, a bit of a session where we ask each other some questions, but then I'd love to hear some questions from the audience. So I'm just going to say again, if you got anything you want to know to anyone, please write it down, and we'll get over to Angela, and we'll get those questions, as many as we can, asked. I'm hearing a lot from a lot of you around buy-in. Teacher buy-in, student buy-in, parent buy-in, district buy-in, all of that needs to happen in order to be able to make this shift. One of the things that I think holds a lot of districts back, holds a lot of teachers back from making that jump in that, is fear. They fear about what is it going to mean to all of a sudden, I mean, the original name of this session is This Isn't What I Learned in School Anymore. And I don't think any of us here learned about competency-based education in their university setting. And I think a lot of teachers are just going to say, well, I don't really want to do this because that's going to be in a whole new mindset, everything's going to be new. I don't want to do that. I've done all this for a really long time, and so I'll just keep doing this. This will be fine. So I guess one of the things that I want to ask, and I'm going to direct this towards Tim, is we need to at some point convince people that this is going to be okay. This is an interesting and a better, or whatever you want to say, like this is a way that we need to try, because it's going to do right by our kids. And a lot of people are going to say, well, whatever form it's going to take, it's about fear, how they don't want to go and make that jump. And we want to be able to impart in them, like, what do you wish you knew? So one of the things I want to know is, we have to convince teachers that this is going to be okay, because it's worth it not only for them and they're pushing their practice, but for the kids. And I wonder if you could speak on one or two things that you wish you knew that can help us think through how to convince teachers. This is like, what do you wish you knew before you jumped into this?
Thanks, Matt. I think what I wish I knew before this whole great adventure started, I wish I took into consideration that releasing my power does not make me powerless. Meaning, I'm just transferring my power to the student and his student agency and student efficacy. We're used in a traditional setting where we're the authority and we stand up and we regurgitate the curriculum to the kids, and then they give it back to us in testing situations, and we feel like the greatest teacher in the world. With the CBE model and the mastery-based model, we're actually teaching them how to learn. And one of the downfalls of that is once we move from giving them curriculum and teaching them how to learn, we discover gaps in our own skill set. So we have to shore up those gaps so that we can be better advocates to the kids and give them the best chance of succeeding. All right, me?
Yeah.
All right. So the thing about when we first started competency-based education and mastery-based learning, we had this question: how many attempts at mastery should a student get before we move on, or before they demonstrate mastery? How many attempts do they get? This is for you, Liz.
Yeah, Thanks. This is also a question that we've grappled a lot with at our school, and it's shifted as we've developed. At first, we had this ambitious goal that every student would attempt each standard at least 5 times in order to master that standard. We realized pretty quickly that that was a bit too much. Some students need that many attempts in order to be able to demonstrate their mastery, but some students can do it in a lot fewer. And depending on the type of assignments that you're using as measurements of mastery, one assignment could really be really, really rigorous and take a really long time to do. So we've narrowed down to at least 3 attempts are required for mastery, but it varies by class and by student, and to allow some flexibility in that as well. That there are situations where a student might have already learned a lot, and to really think about the ways that you can be a little bit more asynchronous, that maybe they focus more on other standards because they've already experienced this learning before, and that some students might need a lot more than just those 3 attempts to demonstrate their mastery. Some students may need to revise and come back to it many, many more times, and I think it's really important to have that flexibility and develop a system of what mastery means that really supports and is geared towards your individual students. So my question for Matt, as a teacher, there's a lot of work that goes into what are the right learning targets for your curriculum and for your school. And it's really important for a mastery system to have that information. So how do you support your school in designing the right competencies? How do you make those decisions, and what does that process look like?
For my situation, initially I didn't have any voice in what those were. Those were predetermined during the design process of our school, and so how that process ended up being was essentially looking at what experiences do we want our kids to engage in that we believe are going to be powerful experiences for anyone to experience, and then backwards mapped what are the skills to support that kind of experience. And so, for example, if we want our kids to be able to do some service learning and be able to engage in that type of work, they need to understand what it is to have empathy and how to develop empathy. And so, we wanted to make sure that we gave the experiences where kids were actually being able to go out and be the change in the community. So how can we backwards map that to some skills that they need to be successful at doing that? So that was how we did that, especially for, even with being creative, thinking about how do we solve problems, and what does it mean to design a process for solutions. And so that's how it initially began. And I think where we're at now, because those competencies were determined ahead of time, we're at the point now where we're trying to figure out now how do we make these more real, more meaningful for our teachers, and so it doesn't feel like a foreign thing. But same thing for the students. How are we making these more meaningful for them beyond I mastered it and moving on? And so part of where that's continuing to build on is having kids and teachers be the ones who create the criteria and fully and more define what it means to be or design with empathy, or to be creative, and having them generate what that criteria or what demonstration looks like for that competency. And so by doing so, we hope to instill more meaning beyond just the name of what those competencies are, and make it more meaningful for teachers to incorporate them as they continue teaching their content alongside of these other competencies. And so thanks for that. That was it's a tricky question, and something that we all have to continue figuring out, especially within our contexts. And so I think another element that comes to mind with this too is we're doing all of this work. How are we ensuring that we're still not leaving any kids behind, especially kids that need the different type of approach that our skill set or our competencies may not directly address? And so this question is really towards Troy with your context. How are you guys ensuring that your best practices aren't leaving anybody behind, any kids, and how are you incorporating with the curriculum supports for ELL students and students with an IEP or an individual education plan?
Well, I think it gets back to the idea of buy-in. As you said, the way we do it is we just help them buy in, and it just has to be a perfect pitch to the staff, to the students, and to the parents, right? That this new thing, this CBE, is actually the thing that's going to help you, right? Specifically for IEP students and those students with ELL, it's like, look, you're amazing, right? Your language is just challenged right now for ELL students. However, in these other areas, you're phenomenal. Like you can analyze this stuff, you understand it and can comprehend. And so that's one of the ways. It doesn't take a lot once there's that pitch, once there's the perfect buy-in. I think additionally, for students with IEPs, a student that comes to mind, I won't say his name because they're taping back here, but he is Rain Man in our school. And love this dude, but he will wear you out. He will wear you out with questions. I mean, while you're teaching, he's like, but you said earlier, and it's like, dude, I'm teaching right now. Like I can't answer your question. But he doesn't understand it. However, other students were starting to get annoyed with him at the beginning, but it's like social emotional competency he struggles with. But he passed every single unit of my first year, every single unit. And that was not an easy task to do. And so helping him understand that at this school with competency-based education, you have a chance. Whereas at another school, someone probably kicked you out or dismissed you because of he's on the autistic spectrum. I also think that for ourselves as teachers, understanding that competency-based education is kind of like, and I think it's kind of a trite term these days, like education is a new civil rights, of this, and everything's a civil rights issue. But truth be told, CBE is civil rights because there are some students who in different domains shine, but in maybe 1 out of 4, they don't. But for them to see, well, I'm awesome in this, this, and this, but I just need to pick this up, it's just a different conversation. And I think we capture more students in that way. I think another way that we help implement it in our schools is through weekly advisories. I think it's essential that it just is normalized through advisory. When I sit down with a student first week and say, okay, you have a green here, this is red, this is yellow, what are you gonna do? Awesome on your green, right? So what are we gonna do to work on the red? They see clearly that red is something that they're not doing well in, and so they go, oh, well, I'm gonna do this. That conversation just normalized something that was completely foreign to them 10 minutes ago. So when it's normalized to them, then they can look at their parents and go, oh, I can explain it to you, as opposed to them being confused and then going home saying, I don't know what this is, it's just colors and stuff, I don't get it, right? And then finally, I think the admin needs to expect the teachers to get it at a higher level. When we teach, and I learned in teaching school about Bloom's taxonomy, and this famous scene in Philadelphia, I don't know if you remember it, where Denzel Washington is this would-be lawyer to Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks explains to him why they're trying to fire him because of his HIV status and all this, and Denzel stops him. He goes, hey, stop. Break it down to me as if I were a 3-year-old. And then Tom Hanks does. Okay, this is what is happening. This is how they're trying to get rid of me at my firm. Well, I think teachers need to be at that level. Administrators need to anticipate and expect teachers to be at that level in order to go out and then talk to the students. Because there are far too many teachers, even me. At some points, I'm like, I don't understand how this is connected. And the students asking, I'm like, a good question. Wait till next week or something. So I really do think that administrators need to say, look, let's have those. In International's model, we have these hello principles, right? And the O stands for one learning model for all, meaning what we expect of our students, we also expect in our staff meetings. I think administrators need to expect staff members to be able to explain it during our PD sessions. Like, okay, so Grant, go ahead and explain the competency-based. Go ahead and explain why. And if we can do that, our students will feel more confident, then they will go home and transfer that confidence to their parents.
So we have a couple. We have a couple questions from the audience, which I think are very much in line with what you were just saying around this transitioning and around what do we do now. We had a question from the audience. talk about some of the best ways to transition students in the first year of CBE, but I guess I would also add teachers as well. So are there experiences or are there specific things that you can point to of saying, this is my first year in CBE and this is what's good? And as districts or as people who make a lot of big decisions, think about, am I going to start introducing a CBE model into maybe one of my high schools or into one part of something that I have control over? What is that? What is that first year? What works for students? What works for teachers, having gone through that?
So yeah, first year, we had a 2-week stay with. I mean, literally, it was a 2-week PD session with all of our teachers, our inaugural teachers, and it was quite an eye-opening experience because it was the first time that any of our teachers, including us, got to experience what it was going to be like in a more active learning protocol. And instead of what we're used to when we go to these PD sessions and things like that, where it's a lot of sit and get, which is what our kids have been done to our kids for so many years. And day 2 of this more active learning experience for our teachers and us were just, they blew up. They were breaking down in tears. They were frustrated, angry, went through the whole spectrum of emotions because this was so foreign to them. And but through that experience, we're like, okay, we're starting to get some momentum. We did do some small group pull-out. We did one-on-ones. We tried to give them the experience that they were wanting to meet their needs at the time. And here came day 1 with our kids, or month 1, month 2, and we did the exact same thing to them. We just threw them in it. They'll figure it out. They'll just struggle through it. We'll be alongside and support with them. And again, our kids did the exact same thing. They had that toughest time transitioning, and we didn't do a well enough job to support them with coming from a more passive way of learning that you would see in a traditional school to a more active way of learning. And so I think that comes to speak to what we continue to do and what we have learned from that experience is we've got to, from the forefront, think about how are we building agency, how are we scaffolding this transition for kids as they come from a traditional setting into a more CBE approach, and thinking how can we gradually release some of those responsibilities as we continue down this journey for them, especially our 9th grade group. This year we felt like we did a much better job as a whole team in onboarding our incoming 9th graders as year 2. We were able to cut down that crisis moment by probably only 2 weeks, but nonetheless, that tidal wave is still coming for those 9th graders, and I think it'll be a continued challenge as the newness of it for kids and teachers grapple with it. It is different. It is a struggle, but again, modeling it is the biggest way that we've been able to kind of overcome that. Model the failure, model the learning alongside them.
Model the failure. Anyone else want to?
Adding a few things in terms of, especially with students, it's really important to take that time to let them transition and to really explain what the policy is, of just little things like taking the time to have students close read a rubric. We did a lot of times at the beginning. We spent weeks in the summer, before we opened, and our teachers spent hours and hours writing these really detailed rubrics for every competency, and then we kind of just gave them to the kids. And we just forgot about the step of that took us a lot of time to write them and revise them and all of that. It's going to take the time for kids to be able to read them and really process what the expectations are. So taking the time to really communicate and give kids the time to read really closely what the rubrics mean, and also to be able to self-reflect a bit. I found really valuable for students, giving them the time to, okay, where do I think I am on this rubric? What do I think my next steps are? And time for the teachers to check in with them to see if that understanding is matching.
Great. So, and I've talked a little bit about this around, there needs to be a swell of effort into making this more than just happening in a few spots all over the place. And one of the things that I wanted to address from people who are in it is, what are the things that we still need to solve for in CBE? And this is a question from someone. They said, what are the downsides to CBE? And I guess I would kind of rephrase that, not rephrase it, but reframe it as, what do we still need to solve for? What are the things that you, being in a CBE environment, are still a little frustrated with, saying we need to solve for these kind of problems to be able to make what's happening here in this pocket something that can happen in more places?
Somebody, I'm sure that someone else on the panel will be able to address this because you're further along than we are. We're only in year 2 of our design. But one of the things is being able to correctly communicate transference of CBE to the quote-unquote traditional world. And that's unclear right now to us. I think that we have support staff that are working the numbers in the background. Like if a student transfers out of our school, then this, transfers into that. But I don't know what that means, and the students don't really know what it means. And so we haven't even started talking about graduation yet, right? And so what does that mean to colleges? And do those colleges look upon CBE with, a jaundiced eye? Do they, accept it? Are they, or do we have to then transfer those into the traditional 4.0 category? So that's what I think needs, that communication of, oh yeah, it's a seamless transition or not. And I don't know the answer to that right now.
That's actually a very good summation of what the downsides of CBE are. Is the transference, again, from the CBE model into the expectations of college applications or GPAs, or how does my GPA come out of this mastery base? What is it going to look like? Is there some mysterious formula that we plug in and all of a sudden we have a GPA? I think we as teachers need to be able to understand fully the process, so then we can put that out to the students and the parents.
Another challenge or downside of mastery or competency, I think, is also that sometimes it hits heads with some of the other systems that happen in schools. I'm thinking particularly in terms of time. One of the principles of mastery is that some students will master content quickly and other students will require more time, yet we're mostly tied to systems where, like, June 28th is the end of the school year and, like, we need to give a final grade, and that can be a really difficult, weird thing to grapple with, of like how much extra time, how many revisions can students do if you really believe that they can continue revising their work and continue learning. How do you reconcile that with some pretty hard deadlines in terms of graduation and promoting to the next year and the next grade?
Similarly, to both or all three challenges is, our school is designed around providing as many high value learning opportunities for our kids, and part of that is providing not only access and opportunity but acquisition of college level courses, and so we really strive to get as many of those experiences for our kids as a means to demonstrate that they are college ready and career ready, and so the challenge that's been posing is, again, it comes back to seat time, and it comes back to working with higher ed, both not only in our concurrent enrollment or college classes, but also in CTE. What does that mean? Because that's all managed by them, and so they don't see, or they have not made the transformation to what it means to have a seat time waiver and project base, and how our students can demonstrate mastery in a shorter period of time of the 180 days that you require them to sit in a seat. And so I think that's been, again, along the same threads, with adjunct faculty coming into our school to support our students. How are they shifting their minds and what it means to be a competency-based teacher now that they have their foot in both doors of higher ed and high school?
So one of the other questions that we have directly relates to what you were talking about, Liz, about time. A lot of the students that you all serve are years behind in terms of what the traditional model says you should be here by now. And so one of the questions that we have is it easy to support students who are 1 to 3 years behind grade level using this system? Or, what's your interpretation of coming from a traditional model? How is this a better support from them, or how is this a better support for them, for those students who've struggled in the past and who are behind?
The biggest thing that I'm going to respond to that with is kids are amazing, and regardless of what scale, what measure you're using to say where they are or where they should be, if the expectation is held high for them, they will reach it. And we've seen it already in the sense that we said all of our ninth graders are going to take AP Lang, and all kids did.
So are we then to infer that this system keeps that bar higher than a lot of other, than a more traditional system?
And I think thanks for asking that follow-up, because I think that what this allows us that the traditional system doesn't is it does allow us to create the multiple on and off ramps to allow kids to access and get that opportunity, and then have the opportunity to gain that knowledge and demonstrate it. In a traditional sense, a kid who wants to take AP has to know that by the time they're an 8th grader or IB and be on that track indefinitely. If they fall out, there's no way back in necessarily. And with this approach, we're able to have that flexibility. Like, oh, you want to be an AP? Okay, just move over to that group and engage in that content with the supports. And so I think that's the biggest thing or advantage that we've been able to see with that is we're allowed, and we can create those quick pivots that allow for those multiple on-ramps and off-ramps for students to engage in that higher bar. And setting it that this is where we all are going to go. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to be alongside you. Here's the on-ramp, or here's the on-ramp. And so I think that's how we see it.
Anyone else? Yeah.
So one of the things that I picked up from Matt's school when I went to visit in Denver is the amount of agency that the students had. I mean, it was incredible. You had student advocates, and they were so confident that they can go and change the leadership and change ideas, and they had examples of doing that. One of the discouraging things from leaving is like, wow, our students are not there yet, right? So in terms of AP, when you say AP, I taught AP economics and AP psychology, and none of our students right now, they're in fact in the other direction. They're in the deficit in terms, we have some students with the ELL population that have interrupted learning, students that have come or working on their alphabet because they have no schooling at age 15. They come here, and so it's challenging so I would say no, it's not that we're setting the bar higher, right? What we're doing is we're setting different bars. And they can succumb the bar of language or the bar of content or the bar of social emotional skill, but yet they're having a harder time surmounting that bar of content, right? Or maybe that bar of critical thinking. And so, but there's victory. And that's the one thing, whoever wrote the question, there's victory along the way. None of my students have not been successful in every single thing, right? They all have a measure of success somewhere, whether it's social emotional, critical, language, or content. But coming from a deficit, right? Coming from a place where a lot of them just struggle academically, it's just difficult, but they like seeing, oh, you're doing well in this area. Telling them that there's a victory. In the traditional setting, you either pass or you fail. There is no, well, this area you're doing well in this area. So that's what I really like about CBE is that there's some space for encouragement.
Great. Yeah.
To piggyback off what Troy is talking about, I think the CBE model, in a way, keeps the students' motivation high because they're not walking away from your class with an F or a D, knowing they have to repeat it the next year. They'll walk away with an I, and what the I says is that I maybe didn't show mastery in these competencies, but I have time, and I can get back to this space, and I don't have to repeat the course. And ultimately, it's about student growth. So we want to encourage that growth, and like Troy said, there are areas where we can demonstrate successes for them, and they can build off those successes, and in doing so, it motivates them to keep going versus giving up.
So we have one more, a little bit of a technical question for you, just kind of switch gears a little bit. In terms of, and maybe we could have different opinions of this, is what do you value more and why? So on one side, do you value growth plus student progress metrics? And on the other side, do you instead value measuring against standards metrics? Is there a difference in terms of what you all as a school value more?
Measure against standards, and what was the other one?
Growth plus student progress. Talking about growth towards standards, or are we just talking about growth overall? Is there a way that you guys work that into your model?
Well, I think it's hard to really bifurcate the two. Like, it has to be, I think, a combination of both, because the district is looking at us and saying, you have to overcome these standards. And we are saying, coming from a more empathic view in a more holistic view, saying, you know, however, they just grew, and that's awesome. So that progress is incredible, and that growth is incredible. So I think we embrace them both without, you know, ignoring either.
And I think with that same thread, it's also, I think, somewhat intentional to show that you can have both and do effectively. And we talk about whole child. I think it encompasses both of those. And it helps in terms of our practice in our school. It's how we're showing evidence that we, against the naysayers, that we can do both effectively.